Good morning. I'm Dusky Cherry, President of ITC Midwest. For the third straight year, we are pleased to be the presenting sponsor for the Iowa Ideas Conference and extraordinarily proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As an electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering hundreds of Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that will shape the future of our state. ITC Midwest was formed in 2007 to improve electric transmission reliability and increase transmission system capacity in Iowa. And we followed through on that commitment with more than $4.1 billion in capital investments to date. Our investments in the system not only serve the changing needs of customers, they also provide additional capacities to support economic growth and development of low-cost renewable energy resources. Our investments have resulted in a 62% drop in transmission-related outages since ITC acquired the system and began operating it. From extreme weather events such as last year's derecho to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy, from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry is suddenly in the national spotlight. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. You know, we often talk about here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. I want to thank you for your participation to help shape the future and wish you a great conference.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Maybe I mentioned this a minute ago, but my name is Adam Sullivan. I'm a columnist at the Gazette, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. The title of our panel is Voting and Redistricting. So we have a pretty broad focus. Remind you once again, if you have questions for the panelists at any time during the program, you can type those into your webinar platform, and those will get sent to me. We're scheduled to go to 11:20 today, and then there is a lunch break for the conference, and then the next session after that is one of the keynotes with Kelly Garcia from the state. So check on the schedules. And again, I appreciate all of the participants for being here to watch, and especially to all the panelists who I'll give an opportunity here in a minute to introduce themselves. Just want to give a couple prefaces. Our panelists are encouraged to share their own views, and they might disagree, and that is welcome. And they're also encouraged to weigh in back and forth if they if they want to respond to a question that was asked to another panelist. I've encouraged them to do that. It's not a debate, but it's fine if it is conversational. And with that, I am going to ask my panelists to each take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And I'll start with Alan Ostergren.
Well, good morning, Adam. Thanks for the invitation to participate in this summit. My name is Alan Ostergren. I'm an attorney practicing in Des Moines. I was the Muscatine County attorney. I was elected 3 times to that role. I went into private law practice last year, and I also do public interest litigation under the Kirkwood Institute, which is a nonprofit based in Des Moines.
Thank you. Terese Grant.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Terese Grant. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be here today to talk about 2 things that are extremely important to the League: redistricting and voting. As many people know, the League does a lot of work to promote voting. We register voters, we educate voters on how to vote, we educate them on their candidates, we hold forums. And so this is a process that's been important to the League for over 100 years. And so again, it's a great opportunity to be here today and discuss these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And Auditor Travis Weipert.
Travis Weipert, Johnson County Auditor. Start my 3rd year as the auditor, obviously here, Johnson County. Before becoming auditor, I spent 13 years working as a senior accountant at Aegon Cedar Rapids. Had always been around politics, never thought I would run for office. here I am. And then to make things more exciting, I have a 14-month-old at home. So if you do the math, she was born just before the presidential election, which is not a busy time at all for an auditor. So having said that, Adam, I'm glad to have everybody joining us, and thank you to you and Liz.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis, and the rest of the panelists for those introductions. I want to start talking a little bit about redistricting. As everyone here knows, Iowa is in the middle of a process that goes through every 10 years where we redraw the congressional lines and also the state legislative lines. That happens in every state. It was postponed this year because of census data was held up due to the pandemic, but it's moving forward now. So I want to start actually with a question from the audience. Bernie said, what can we do as private citizens to affect the process? I think he's talking about redistricting. I want to turn that to Terese, because I know you've been tracking that. What does the public input portion of that look like?
Well, right now, I think the key would be perhaps to contact your senators and your representatives, because now we're already into somewhat of a phase 2 of the redistricting process. Phase 1 perhaps would have been when the first map was drawn. And during that time, right after the first map was drawn, the process, the way the process works is that the temporary redistricting advisory commission held open hearings. And at that time, the public was encouraged to make their comments known in either writing or participate in those 3 hearings that they held at that time. And there were many Iowans who did. And the general consensus during those public hearings was that most Iowans are extremely proud of the redistricting process in Iowa because it is nonpartisan. You know, the maps are drawn by the Legislative Services Agency that is nonpartisan. And then once they draw the maps, they go to the legislature. And as we know, the first maps after they were drawn were rejected. But the overwhelming consensus of people who spoke and who wrote said that they want to keep Iowa the gold standard across the United States, and the gold standard because it is nonpartisan. So, but we're now at the LSA is drawing the second maps. And so again, it will be up to our legislators. And so it's time perhaps to contact your senator and your representatives and encourage them to vote for either the second map. And I would encourage them to vote to the second map, because when we get to the third map, things get a little dicey because it could be amended. So we want to keep the eye with the gold standard. So contact your legislators. That's what you need to do now.
So Terese, you mentioned with the first map there, the commission held public meetings and took public input. Am I correct that for the second and potentially the third map, that process does not repeat?
That's right. The process does not repeat. The track only held hearings for the first map. And from now on, there will be no further public hearings.
Gotcha. Travis, let me turn to you. Terese mentioned that Iowa's process is known as the gold standard nationally. And I think here in Iowa, both Republicans and Democrats agree with that. They like the process. What makes that different here in Iowa than what other states do?
Well, I'm glad that was brought up, that we're the gold standard. I'm the national liaison, Democratic legislative liaison for the National Elections Center. And every time I'm at a conference, we hear about how great Iowa is when it comes to redistricting. And we're great because we don't let gerrymandering interfere in the process. If you look at the law, and I think we'll talk about it later, there's just certain things you can't do as cities or counties that make us the gold standard. You know, you can't chop this out because my friend lives here, so I want to help him, so let's create a district for him. Now, it was brought up earlier, I'm a little nervous if we get past map 2 that, you know, I don't want to get into politics, but we might start seeing politics play a role in our redistricting process, which would immediately take away Iowa being the gold standard, which would be unfortunate.
Take a step back and explain, Travis, the difference between first, second, and third maps for folks who might not be familiar.
Well, it was just, you know, as it was brought up, the legislative, it's a nonpartisan committee will come out with a second map. And then once we get down to the third, then amendments can happen. It can end up at the Supreme Court. Just a lot of things when you look at the history of when we've started this redistricting process in Iowa, we've never had to go down that road. And hopefully both sides can come to an agreement on this second map and it will fit everyone's needs.
Thank you. Alan, as you know, the Iowa Senate recently voted down the first proposed set of maps. I know that you're not formally part of that process in any way, but what are some of the factors that might go into a decision like that?
Well, I think the Senate was pretty clear in finding that the map was not sufficiently compact in the districts. Particularly if you look at the congressional districts, they were, pork chop shaped, triangular shaped. They were not really what you'd look at the map and say, okay, that's a distinct region of Iowa that should have representation in the U.S. House. And there were some state legislative districts that also, I think, were not as compact as the legislature would like. It is part of the process that they can do an up or down vote. They could go to the second map, which obviously is also an up or down vote. It's happened, I think, 2 previous times where we've gone to the second map and then it's been adopted. We've not yet gone to the third map. I think there are lots of legitimate considerations that could cause a map to be rejected that don't have anything to do with partisan politics. The congressional districts, each one has to be about 750,000 people, and that the law allows each district to vary by about 1% in size. The map that the LSA came out with, instead of a 7,500 margin is what they had to work with, the margin that they had was about 36 people was the average deviation in the maps. So that's great that they're that close in population, but you also want to balance that with, are they compact? Are they relatively square? Or, they in a more sensible compact boundaries. So the legislature has lots of considerations to look at there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's all I have prepared questions about redistricting, but if folks in the audience want to talk more about redistricting, send your questions forward. But I'm going to move on to a set of questions about some election reform changes Iowa's seen in the last few years. Let me turn back to Terese. In Iowa in 2017 passed a voter ID law for the first time that was implemented over the following couple of years. The league has been critical of that law and others like it from other states. How do you assess its impact so far?
Well, right. I mean, you have to understand that the league is going to oppose any restriction that makes it a little bit more difficult or challenging for people to vote. The league is, one of our mottos is empowering voters defending democracy. And so any restriction, anything that makes it a little bit more challenging or difficult for a voter, we're going to object. But the voter ID law has become something that I think people now understand, and they know when they go to vote, they need to have a valid ID. And those are, there's numerous things, your driver's license, or the military ID, passport, and those things, that you have to have. And so it's been, it's understandable now when you go to vote. And so we all know this has to be done. But what has happened even since 2017 is that more and more restrictions have been passed by our legislatures, and these things are becoming, like this year, for example, in 2021, we have to learn now, when do I vote? How do I vote? And so it's just becoming more complicated. And the average citizen says, gee, I don't know how to vote anymore. And so they all just give up. And so we're making it harder for our citizens, which we think is extremely unfortunate with the continuation of laws. And we had an election in 2020 where so many people participated, and it was a great turnout. It was the best turnouts, and that's what we want to see. We want to see people voting. It's a fundamental right of citizens. And to make it harder, it's just makes it such that citizens, just say, well, it's just too complicated. So we'd like to make it so that people have an easy access. And so we're working hard, as I know Travis is working hard to make sure that people understand what the rules are today, what the timelines are to, vote early and request your absentee ballot, and so that people, can vote. But we just don't want to make it harder than it needs to be.
I want to open it up if either Alan or Travis wants to talk on the voter ID law, but I'll also couch that in with my next question, which is Critics have said that Iowa's voting laws have made it harder to vote in the past several years, but in both 2018 and 2020, I think we set turnout records for a midterm and a general election. So what do you make of that, those dynamics? Ask Alan.
Sure. Well, I think you're exactly right, Adam, that's good evidence that these laws do not restrict people from voting. And there is some social science research to show that when people have more faith in the integrity of the process, they tend to participate more. Voter ID laws are very popular. It's an issue that a majority of voters in general support. And even if you break it down by political party, even a majority of registered Democrats support having voter ID. So it's a very common sense law that has not proven to prevent people from voting.
Travis, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, being on the front line, I would disagree with that 100%. Dealing with the voters who call, don't have ID, don't have a friend. I mean, right now we're dealing with absentee requests that aren't properly done and we have to call, where normally we could have looked up that information before. There's not one auditor in the state that won't tell you this isn't putting an extra burden on us and the voters. Now, I always hear this argument, well, we had record turnout. Well, yeah, right now the country, one, is so polarized, you're seeing people vote. And number two, a county like Johnson with such rapid growth, we're going to be setting records probably every election until I'm no longer auditor. I mean, just with the growth in general. So, to me, I see the back end of it. I see the struggles my staff are going through, contacting people. I hear the phone calls to the 70, 80-year-old couple who, are like, well, why are you calling me? Do we know this is for real? We've never had to do this before. So yeah, I do see it as a hindrance when you're working on the back end of elections.
I appreciate that. I've got another question that I want to give each of our panelists an opportunity to respond to. Along the same lines, this past year, the governor signed a bill to decrease the number of early voting days and also decrease the number of hours that election days. So let me stick with you, Travis. What do you think the impact of that will be?
It's already stressful on our office, when you shorten the window from 29 to 20. And I always hear this argument, oh, well, that's the average across the country. Well, if you're an overseas voter, you have 45 days to vote. We start mailing out ballots 45 days early for those folks. So if we have the ballots in hand, why can't the local citizens vote 45 days out? I don't see any argument that we need to cut back on Uokava voting. A lot of those people are students studying overseas, stuff like that. How come, they get the benefit when our local folks only get now 20 days? I mean, I'd like to see, and I know there's a question probably later about federal legislation. I'd just like to see it be 45 days across the board. And then it's uniformed. I know each state is supposed to set their own election law, but here's one case where if you already have the ballots ready 45 days out, why are we just sitting on them and not mailing them out to people who want them?
Thank you. Terese, I know you were keeping tabs on things this past year in the legislature. What do you make of the bill?
Well, I see too that, it really makes it difficult for certain segments of the population. For example, older people, who don't get out and about, it makes it difficult for them. If they're going to vote absentee, for example, and if they have to have if they can't get it to the post office or something like that, then they have to have somebody special do it for them. I see a problem, for example, I live in Grinnell, Iowa, and we used to have, satellite voting for senior communities. And that now you have to have, 100 signatures to do it. I think there is one satellite voting here in our community, but there used to be, several. And so we don't have that access anymore. I think that it's just making it more difficult to vote. Some of the laws that are in place right now, and for absentee voting, for example, the period by the time you get your ballot, and then because they can only mail it out, at a certain time, and then you have a short amount of time to mail it in, and it has to be at the auditor's office on election day, you have a short amount of window there. And we know that the post office now has slowed down. And so it's just makes it harder and more challenging to vote today than ever before. And I think that's extremely unfortunate.
Alan, I want to turn the same question to you. I also want to reiterate what I said at the start, that we encourage disagreement here. And I don't want Alan to feel like he's a odd man out or getting dogpiled here. But so I appreciate you making the case, Alan.
Sure. I think if you look from a broader perspective, Iowa still has pretty generous voting rules. You compare our voting rules to other states, we still allow, for one thing, we have no excuse absentee voting, which many states don't do. Your fundamental right to vote is the right to vote on the day of the election at your polling place. And Iowa does lots of things to enhance that right by making it easy to vote early and by absentee ballot. And so, big picture, there's lots of ways for people to participate in the process.
Thank you.
And can I add something there, Adam?
Please.
I mean, I think, and I don't want to pick on Alan, but he said I was pretty generous. Shouldn't we be not pretty generous, but generous when it comes to voting? I mean, we all of a sudden went from, now we have to get petitions for satellites. And at the same time, they wanted to restrict access to universities for satellite sites. I mean, to me, how is that not reducing voting and making it harder? We went from just a couple of years ago, the Republican legislature passed the barcode on envelopes, which means we could read ballots that came in after that Monday. We thought, great, all the counties went to that process. And here we are a few short years later, and now we've changed the drop deadline till Monday, which just shortens the window a little bit more. So, I don't know how you don't call that hindrance.
Alan, you can respond if you'd like, or we can move along.
Well, I think we could, what the auditor is saying, I mean, you can always think of something else you could do. And at some point, the legislature has to make a policy decision as to what is a reasonable election system, what is one that is balanced throughout the state. Not every county is like Johnson County with the resources that Johnson County has. And so the legislature, which is in charge of our election system, has to look at what's a election system that works for all 99 counties and make that judgment. And if you compare us big picture to other states, I think we're doing very well.
Thank you both. Appreciate the back and forth.
Could I say something?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I know we're talking about Iowa elections, and we oftentimes compare Iowa to other states, and maybe we should look at something that's happening in Washington, and that's some legislation that would make voting somewhat universal across the United States. And I'm talking about a couple different bills that are being talked about right now that I know the league is going to be focusing on, and that's the Freedom to Vote Act, as well as the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act. And I think those things could certainly help all of us in the United States, because like Alan said, I mean, I was pretty generous in some cases, and other states are perhaps worse, but maybe we need a universal system in this country where, everybody has the same access to vote all across the United States. And these bills would do that.
So that's something that Travis hinted at a minute ago. So let's focus on that for a minute if anyone else wants to elaborate. But the basic idea is that there's proposals that would nationalize elections to some extent, or set national standards, which would be a pretty big departure from the way we run elections. Alan or Travis, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can go first on this one. I was deeply upset when the Voter Rights Act was tossed out by the Supreme Court. I thought there were some good pieces in there. Having said that, I'm not all about just straight up federal legislation overseeing elections. I think there's some good things the feds do, but again, this is where I'd probably agree a little bit more with Alan that, let the states run the show. They know how to do it. But at the same time, let the counties, I know Alan mentioned we have more resources than others. Well, that's local control. If our board wants to spend the money, they'll come up with the money, kind of like, other counties. So, I'm not big on the whole federal legislation, but I think also that it was kind of brought up too by Terese. And to back up what we were talking about a minute ago about Iowa and being generous or pretty generous when it comes to your options to vote. And she mentioned Washington. Well, look at Colorado also. I have relatives of the different party out there, and they actually love the all vote by mail. So, I mean, when we talk about Iowa's pretty generous, and I said, well, there's generous out there, and it's Washington, Colorado, other Oregon. Iowa should be forward thinking, looking at those instead of what I would call restricting here at home.
Alan, thoughts on the federal angle?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but so I think the federal legislation would be a massive, likely unconstitutional change in how we run elections in this country, that the states are the primary determiners of how their election systems work and set election rules for their own systems. And to have a top-down federal model, I think we don't understand necessarily this would be like full on election litigation all the time if HR 1 or HR 4 were to pass. It would put Iowa basically under the pre-clearance regime, under the Voting Rights Act, and we would be treated like Mississippi in 1964. And you couldn't, the auditor could not move a polling place without going and getting permission from a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. I mean, literally could not go from a church to an elementary school in his jurisdiction without, going to court to get clearance for that. And we'd have practice pre-clearance on all kinds of voting rules that are common sense and very popular. So, that bill looks like it's not going anywhere. And that's a good thing. We in Iowa can run an election system that works well, and other states can run their election systems. States should be free to innovate and take good ideas off of each other, but simply having everything decided in Washington, D.C. would be a terrible idea.
Thank you. I appreciate all your views. Glad to have a diversity of views on that. I want to move on to a next question, a question of my own, and I'm going to group it with a question from the audience. But so in my lifetime, both parties have cast doubt on the presidential election results, most recently Democrats in 2016 and Republicans in 2020. The 2020 case was, in my view, worse because it led to violence at the Capitol. Polls, I think it's interesting that polls show more voters are more confident in election results after their party wins than after their party loses. And so my question is, how do you rate Americans' confidence in elections? And I'll add that with the audience question from Seth. He says, time and again, investigations find very little evidence of voter fraud. So why are we still using that as a reason to restrict voting? Let me start with Terese.
Yeah, this is I saw this question coming up and I thought long and hard about it. And we unfortunately are facing a very polarized nation right now. We have culture wars. We're looking at elections today that we used to call off-year elections with the city and school board elections, where there is much more division right now, and there are issues that are coming up that are cultural issues, kind of thing, that are creating some more division and perhaps increasing perhaps the distrust or the I don't know what you call it about elections today. But it seems to me too that some of this comes from our politicians who tell us that, we can't trust elections, it's not fair, and even in Iowa, I can't remember how long ago it was, there was I think it was the Attorney General who did some research on fraud in Iowa and came up with hardly anything. And so when you look at the reality of elections, they're pretty fair, and it's very, very difficult to do anything fraudulent with elections today. And yet there is this thinking that there is some kind of fraud in elections and they're not unfair, or there's something wrong. When in actuality, I'm sure Travis would support this, because I know our county auditor, we asked her the same thing when she did a form for us a week or so ago. Elections are free, are very fair in Iowa and across I think across the United States, but I know certainly in Iowa. But it's very disturbing to think that people have this idea that there's something wrong with the election. There's something, and I think that was the basis of some of the election laws that were passed in 2021, that we need to make them more secure, whereas that's really not necessarily true. So I'll let the other folks give their opinion on this one.
Alan, do you want to take that one next?
Sure. Voter fraud is, obviously a term that's used, and the connotation of it is the person going from precinct to precinct with a stack of fake IDs like these Jason Bourne and voting multiple times, and that is a very rare thing, very, very rare. What's a bigger concern are more systemic election administration issues. Just today, there were indictments in Philadelphia over a vote rigging scheme. You do see cases brought where people are engaged in election misconduct. And it's important, we're at a point where people's faith in institutions, I think, are probably at an all-time low. And so to build up the trust that people have in the election process by having transparency, the ability to observe what's going on, that the reports of the results are made as quickly as possible at the end of the election, that it's all out in the open, everything's on the table, that even at the end of the day, if there's not misconduct going on, this idea that, okay, we're, some warehouse someplace that we saw in, Detroit and Philadelphia and other places in the last election where they're just counting ballots and nobody can have access and results come out haphazardly, that really detracts from people's confidence in the process. So I think it's very important that we have a system where people see that it works in a transparent, above the board manner. I think we have a good system in Iowa, but we have to be vigilant to keep it that way and to make sure that people have faith in that process.
Travis, same question to you about confidence and security.
I think it goes state by state. I think here in Iowa, we have folks that are fairly confident, 70, 75% confident in the system. Now, when I say that number, I think that's unfortunate. They should be right around 100%. I've been to other states, obviously multiple states, met with the Secretary of States while I was there. I think overall the country should feel good about the state of the elections and in the country as a whole, security wise, just everything in general. But I'll tell you what I believe is eroding the confidence in the election. And it's both parties going out and saying the election was rigged, stolen, ballots were found. I mean, we just went through the Arizona audit and what happened there. I mean, I went through the recount here, which we're going to talk about, and the winner was still the winner. Our count here hardly changed at all when you look at 80,000 ballots. So I just think this narrative of that, you got to quit with beating on election officials. We've seen too many good ones leave this year because they just got fed up with the emails about, it's a fraud and you're precasting ballots. I mean, I don't know how we do it. Adam, I just, this question makes me think that I could go outside and do an interview right now and say, oh yeah, I'm the auditor. And inside that, I feel like we're not following procedures, even though we are. And you know what that's going to do? The perception immediately. That's what's happening is the narrative in the media, social media is just, you can't trust elections, and it's unfortunate.
Thank you all for that. So we have about 20 minutes left here in the session. I have one individual question each for the panelists, and I'd like to give them each a minute or two to give an outro, but if we might have time to get to one more audience question, so please submit those now if you have them. We're going to talk for a few minutes about a situation that Travis just alluded to, and I want to turn it to Alan. In the 2020, in the 2nd Congressional District in Iowa, there was a challenge and recount process. Can you just give us an overview of what that was about?
Sure, Adam. Yeah, that was a very complicated thing. I don't want to use up all the remaining time talking about it. And I had a piece on realclearpolicy.com that if people are interested in, they could go look up, and it kind of did a more of a deep dive into some of the backstory and the recount and then the contest of the election. You know, we had the closest congressional race in the country here in Iowa. The final initial certified vote total showed Marinette Miller Meeks up by 47 votes over Rita Hart. Went through a recount throughout the 2nd district, including Johnson County. And in the final analysis, that recount resulted in the final certified total of Marinette Miller Meeks winning that race by 6 votes. Now, I will tell you, I think the real margin was more than that. And what I explained in my piece on realclearpolicy.com was, you know, there were some issues in the Scott County recount where we lost 30 net votes, and some other issues where, you know, really, I think the margin, if we had gone to a state contest proceeding, we would have been able to show that the margin was even higher than those 6 votes. But eventually was contested in the U.S. House, and then Rita Hart withdrew that contest at the end of March. You know, it was a stress test for the system. It was very interesting to have that up front and close look at the recount process. You know, I have increasing respect for many of the county auditors that we dealt with. Mr. Weipert's office was very professional, and you know, they really, I think, were the gold standard in counties that we dealt with during that recount. A very difficult process, but I'm confident that the result that was reached was correct.
Alan, just to stick with you for a minute, one thing I want to clarify, and I don't think it often wasn't clear in the reporting about this, is that the Hart campaign referred to some 22 votes, but that wasn't necessarily exhaustive. You know, not every single ballot had been reviewed to that standard that they, however they came up with those. Does that make sense?
Right. So they, you know, and that was for their House contest. They claimed that there was 22 ballots, that it ended up being a net of +9 for Rita Hart. And, you know, if we had gone all the way through that contest, we had other ballots that we knew we could talk about. The 30 ballots that we unfairly lost in Scott County when that recount went off the rails. This gets super complicated. I don't want the audience to get bogged down on it, but, you know, they were all regular election administration decisions. Several of them were ballots in Johnson County. And, you know, this was not voter fraud. It was not misconduct. It was just things that happen in an election process. You know, voters not signing their absentee envelope, voters sending their absentee envelope to the wrong auditor, those kinds of things. And in the end, I'm confident how it all would have netted out is that Marinette Miller Meeks still had more votes.
Thank you for that. Travis, I want to give you a couple of minutes to talk on this situation, and a couple of ways I want to frame that as one, you know, we're talking about these votes that are, you know, counted or not counted through routine election administration. I'm interested in what that looks like from your end. But also, as you went through that recount process, going back to the last set of questions, the results really changed very little, which is pretty amazing over such a big number of ballots. So let me turn it over to you, Travis.
Okay, thanks. First, Alan, thanks for the compliment. Gonna have to get this audio saved. So,
I mean it.
No, thanks again. No, I appreciate that, Alan. It was great to work with you and the other attorneys, and that's how it should run when it comes to an audit being done. Having said that, in regards to like ballots and not being counted, one of the big thgoing there is if, you know, somebody just makes a mark on the ballot, not in the oval, that's where the whole recount process comes in. And I'm going to be like Alan here. I don't want to get into the legal part of it, but when the recount process starts, the auditor really has no duties at that point. It's handed over to the recount board. So each county, and Alan will probably chime in after this, kind of sets their own ground rules. I mean, it's spelled out a little bit in the code, but it's handed over to a different group to run the recount. Now, having said all that, when you talk about the results, Adam, you know, yeah, it didn't change the results here almost at all in Johnson County. And really, it showed our equipment works fine. It's when the voter, you know, is the one that screws up. So, I mean, that's kind of how the whole ballot process works, I guess, in a nutshell. But if you want to add anything, Alan.
Yeah, so I mean, so people can understand, one of the issues with and this is the difference between absentee voting and election day voting is, let's say a voter is looking at the ballot and they're deciding which candidate to vote for, and they put their pen down on the voting target, which is that oval, and they might put it down on one candidate, and then they realize, oh no, I want to vote for the other candidate, and then they fill in the other bubble. Well, the optical scanning equipment is so sensitive that it may actually pick up that tiny little impression of the tip of the pen on that first voting target, and the machine will read it as an overvote and kick it out. Now, if that happens on election day, the ballot will get spit back out and the voter has a chance to fix that. But those things like that, where you go through a recount and when you look at it by eye, you can tell that the voter intended to vote for the candidate where the oval is filled in completely. And so you can make those adjustments along the way. And then also things like not signing the envelope and some of those other things that happens where the voter just didn't quite get it done the right way.
Got it. Thank you both for filling us in on that. That was obviously one of the big news stories of last year, and so it's good to have the two of the inside players here to talk about it. Let me turn to Terese for an unrelated question. The League of Women Voters, I think, has an interesting role in that you both do nonpartisan education of voters, but then you also take sides on some issues like we've talked about with voter ID. So how do you balance those two things, especially in such a politically polarized environment?
It's not easy. I can tell you right that. Because the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. And what that means is that we don't support or oppose candidates or parties. Okay, it's simple as that. But we do have issues that we do support and we advocate for. But it becomes kind of tricky, because I'll get a question, for example, from a local league president and say, there's this event coming up and should we sponsor it? And we take a look at the other sponsors. And if there's a sponsor that is perhaps associated with one party or another, we say, gosh, probably not, because then we look to be perhaps that we're not going to be nonpartisan. So, we really take a look and balance things so we don't look like we're supporting a candidate or a party, in any direction. But we do have issues that we advocate for. In fact, we're having an issues briefing in November. And what we do at that point, the board takes a look at the issues that we want to advocate for at the upcoming legislative session. And we take a look at those issues and we talk about them and we agree that we're going to advocate for those. We have a lobbyist in Des Moines who will speak for the league on certain issues. And so because defending democracy is something that is just important to us as making sure that we have people who people vote and they have access to voting and they know how to vote. So both of those go hand in hand. In fact, when the League of Women was formed 100 years ago, some of the first things that they were advocating for were equal pay for women and protection for children in the workforce, for example. And so again, and those are some issues that we're still perhaps working for today, when we talk about equality for women in all areas. So issues are extremely important to the league, and we advocate for them, and we will talk to our legislators and the governor and whoever else. And so, but that nonpartisan lane is an important one, and we work very hard to try and stay there for sure.
Thank you. We just have about just short of 10 minutes left. And so I'm going to suggest that we go ahead with our closing statements. So I want to give each panelist 1 or 2 minutes to, if they have an extra thought on anything we discussed today, or if you have anything you want to promote or ways that folks can connect with you, then this would be the time. And let's start back with Terese.
Okay, well, again, I want to thank you and the folks who have been listening today for this opportunity. And with the upcoming elections, I would encourage everybody to make sure, first of all, that you're registered to vote, that you know how and when and where to vote, and then you make a plan and then you do that. It's very important for folks to exercise that right to vote this year and in the years to come. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Adam, and thank you to the other panelists. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you. Alan?
Well, thanks, Adam, and thanks to the Gazette for sponsoring this. We're in the voting season for city and school elections, and I think we're going to see record turnout in those elections, and that's a really good thing. There's a lot of people who are much more engaged in what's happening at the local level. School board elections are normally single-digit turnout in a lot of places, and I think we're going to see much higher turnout, and that's a good thing. Your local school board spends half of your property tax dollars, and people should be involved in what's happening at the local level. So I hope this will spark something in people, that they will be engaged in city and school and county elections. And voting is a lot more than just every 4 years voting for the president. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate here. You can find me at ostergrenlaw.com. And with that, thanks, Adam.
Thank you. And Travis, I'll have you give your closing thoughts. And also, I know a few of our audience members here are from Johnson County. So if you could give a quick overview of early voting, what's going on for early voting right now.
Yeah, so I just want to thank the Gazette again, Adam, yourself, for putting this together, Teresa from the president of the League of Women Voters, and attorney Alan Ostergren from Des Moines and the Kirkwood Institute. No, I guess my closing remarks are, and actually Alan kind of took what I was going to say about the city and school elections happening right now. They're so key. And I talk to students about this all the time. And Alan pointed out that the bulk of your property taxes usually goes to the school district. So you should be involved. And 18, 19, 20-year-old kids say to me, well, why should I be involved in school board elections? I don't have a kid and I rent. Well, if the school levy goes up for some reason, that means your rent's probably going to go up, because the guy that owns your rental has to pay higher property taxes. And they kind of give you that look of, oh, these elections are really important, aren't they? Yeah, they are very important also. So no, again, I just want to thank everybody. In terms of voting, we have satellite sites coming up here in Johnson County. You can check our website. Like all 98 other counties, early voting or absentee voting is happening right now at offices, all the county offices across the state. Stop in and vote if you know who you're going to vote for. If you're like me and you're waiting for the last forum because you haven't heard a few people speak, take your time. You can always come out on election day. So again, thanks to the Gazette and the other panelists.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. I think this discussion went really well. I'm glad we had aired some disagreements and had some back and forth. I think that's productive to get the sides out there. So.